Starting from my immediate left, Kayon Pryce, who's the founding principal of the Brooklyn STEAM Center at the Navy Yard. To his left, Courtney Collins-Shapiro, CEO of Portal Schools. To her left, Amar Kumar, founder of KaiPod Learning. And last but not least, and we were very lucky to get an employer perspective on this panel, Dodson, who's a senior manager for D&I and community outreach at Belkin International. So we're gonna leap right in. I mean, just by way of introduction, and then I'll have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll go into a little rapid fire questioning here. But you know, I think it's an interesting moment. It's fair to say that these folks, I think it's accurate to say, before the pandemic, had long been planning for and implementing a variety of approaches to changing the relationship between education and work. Education and careers. Today, we're going to talk mostly about the aspect of that work that has to do with co-locating schools at workplaces, but we know that it's more than that, although that's a very interesting aspect of this, which is why we're going to be talking about it. But it's about curriculum alignment. It's about connecting young people to different kinds of social capital as well. So they've been engaged in that work for a long time. JFF is a big admirer of those approaches, a big promoter of those approaches. For many moons ago, we were at the forefront of the national school to career movement. And many moons later, we still are advising state policymakers, state system leaders, foundations about approaches that can integrate college and career experiences into the high school curriculum, just as a normal part of what high schools do and what high school students experience. These folks are the pros, however, and it's a timely conversation because in the context of the post-pandemic, or we hit pause, so maybe it's the pause post-pandemic that we're in right now. It seems like, the shock to the education systems and maybe the disequilibrium that's in the mindset about what schooling is about, who knows, or we might snap back to normal, but it seems like there might be an opportunity where you can see students, parents, policymakers, different stakeholders asking for a different kind of education in a way that might open the door to making these opportunities less exceptional and more the norm. So we're going to dig in to that and the programs, the schools, and the opportunities ahead. So I want to start by asking each of our panelists to do the quick 90-second elevator pitch about the following question. What does your work have to do with this topic of fusing school and the workplace? And how is it that what you're designed to do is supposed to work and make a difference for young people? So this is the one where we actually do round robin. So Kayon, you want to start?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kayon Pryce, as Joel mentioned, and I run a shared instruction high school program in New York City that's co-located on the Brooklyn Naval Yard, which is a 300-acre industrial facility with over 450 plus businesses. We have everything from artificial intelligence companies to self-driving car manufacturers. You can literally operate the Mars rover from the Navy Yard. And our school is infused within that environment. We're not a standalone facility that sits off to the corner of the yard itself. We're literally within one of their largest properties on the third floor, where that's occupied by 100 plus companies. And our industry partners are plugged into the instruction that our students receive. They come in, they provide one-on-one mentorship, competitions. They'll advise on curriculum, provide teacher training. They'll co-teach with our instructors to ensure what it is our scholars are learning is in line with the changes in the demands of those respective industries. And so we found tremendous success in this model, and we are just recently been approved to open up 2 other locations and also grow our current model up to a 9 to 14 associate's degree apprenticeship program that would allow our scholars to acquire the majority of their associate's degree requirements through a hands-on apprenticeship approach with those neighboring businesses and businesses that we actually operate ourselves. Thank you.
So Portal Schools is a new network of micro schools, and we're starting in Los Angeles, so we're just opening next week. And we are co-located physically on an employer work site. So each of our micro schools is actually physically sited at the corporate campus. And so we do many things, but certainly the intensive career exploration and experience is a core of what we do. So when our young people start in 9th grade, they can complete high school and college at the same time. So it's a 4 to 5 year program from high school to bachelor's degree. Completion is the optimal plan, and while they're moving through the sequence of their instructional program, they're also then doing everything from exploring the various different career opportunities at the employer partner, and then they're doing work-based projects into apprenticeship, and possibly then co-developed training. So we're really intensely involved with the employer partner on what do they need on the back end, so that the young people are then prepared when they graduate to come into family-sustaining careers that have a forward path in high-growth industries.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amar Kumar, and I run KaiPod Learning. And at the core, our job is to make it easier for students who go to school online to do well academically and make friends and socialize. And the way we do that is by inviting students who are studying online into physical learning centers to do their online coursework, interact with other kids their age, be supported by a teacher who helps them with their coursework, and a teacher who's organizing projects and enrichment activities. And so if you sort of connect the dots to the topic here, one of the biggest struggles that online students have is socialization and sense-making of the curriculum. So what is the relevance of this curriculum to what I need to know? And the way we're thinking of solving that, and we're a brand new company, the way we're thinking of solving that is by actually co-locating our pods in employers. And so either it becomes a benefit for those employers to have sites for their employees' kids to be doing school near them. And on the other hand, it becomes a benefit for our pods to have these students co-located with employers applying what they're learning in middle school and high school in the real world.
Awesome. All right, to round us out, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dodson. I kind of have a unique position here. So I'm by credential a licensed psychologist in the state of California, and corporate America is very, very new to me. So my take is to really ground everything that Belkin's doing in the D&I space in wellness and well-being, and that also extends to our efforts with Portal. So in addition to Mindful Mondays with Dr. Milo, I don't usually speak in the third person, but nevertheless, here we are. To really ground it in mental health, well-being, and the other piece I really want to highlight here is that over the last year and a half, corporate America has, by firestorm, launched positions, promotions, et cetera, for diversity and inclusion work. And I think in addition to scratching out the myth that there isn't diverse talent out there, we know that's a lie. We actually not only need to recruit better, but we also need to develop talent more and develop more diverse talent. So for me, it's about a corporate partnership here that allows us to engage in our communities and really communicate with our communities to not just educate, but to empower and mentor. So lots more to follow, but that's kind of just an overview to round us out here.
That's terrific. Thanks so much for the concise summaries there. So I'm going to ask Kayon to start because you have the most mature effort. A lot of these are new, right? But so I wanted to ask, first of all, what kind of evidence are you seeing that this works? And then maybe for the others, what makes you think it'll work? You could even point to Kayon and say, because it's working for him, but you probably have other reasons as well. But how's it going, Kayon?
It's going really well. And I think, I spoke to a partner this morning. We said, we just got to strike while the iron is hot. We've just graduated our third cohort. 96% of our young people have been accepted to four-year colleges, despite a New York Times article and the angle they took on really, picking at us to say, hey, are these students going to be tracked into low-income careers? We've proved them wrong. 100% of our courses carry college credit. So we have scholars leaving our program at upwards of 16 college credits in the online major. Our employer partners are excited to be a part of our program. A mentor of mine, Dr. Jocelyn Rainey, said, if you bring people to the table to help create something special, they tend to own it and believe in it. And early on, we recruited industry professionals to truly design every aspect of our program. So we have a build with, not for kind of model where our employer partners, our parents, our students, our teachers are all building this model. And so they've learned to own it. The majority of our students do our recruiting. So I said 96% of them are off to four-year colleges. We have 50% of them that are in learn and earn situations where they're either working part-time in an industry setting and going to college part-time, or going to college full-time and also holding down a part-time position in the majority of them being in industries that they graduated from. So it's worked well for us, and we are excited to see it work well for everyone else here on the stage.
Yeah, and I think all of us are building our programs on the shoulders of other folks, right? So there's people in this room, so for us at Portal in Los Angeles, the Da Vinci schools and their deep career work-based learning has really been a platform for some of the work we're doing, or, Joel, we've been doing youth workforce development for several decades in multiple cities. So building on that work and saying what's worked in multiple places, and like sort of how do we put that on steroids? And by going to the workforce partner, we're saying now we're going to build this with you, right? We're not just going to say as educators, here's what we think you need, and we're going to try and translate to the workplace language. So we're going to say like there are high growth industries that are having a hard time finding talent. And I think to Milo's point, we're in this sort of COVID moment. I mean, and it wasn't COVID, certainly. There was sort of a lot of movement over the last 18 months really around racial justice and equality in this country. And so, yes, you're seeing employers say, like, what do I need to do about it? And part of the problem is your talent pipeline. And so everyone's saying, oh, I'm just waiting for diverse talent. Now you're starting to see employers say, maybe I can't wait for diverse talent. Maybe I have to actually help grow that, because the traditional K-12 system and higher ed system, quite frankly, aren't actually producing the talent I need, and they're certainly not recruiting the diverse talent I need. So I have to reach further back, whereas if it were 2 decades ago and you said, hey, I want you to start developing your talent pipeline with 14-year-olds. I'm good, I'll wait until they're out of college. Now they're saying, you know what, that's maybe not a bad strategy. If my industry has 3% black staff in computer science or certain places, right, for my industry, it's really hard to find folks. Maybe me continuing to wait for the traditional pipelines isn't going to work. So I think we're in a really interesting moment where we can capitalize on that with the employer sector.
And then I think, Joel, to your question of how do we think it'll work, this summer we ran a pilot cohort of our program, and instead of locating in a traditional school building, we actually found a museum that was willing to host us. So it's not quite an employer, but employer adjacent, if you will. And so what we did is experimented with integrating the student experience that was going through the curriculum, integrating it with the museum itself. So the students were learning some content as part of their online school, but then they were applying it as part of understanding the history of that area, understanding the content within the museum. And the thing that they loved about it is that they realized, they said there's no boundary between work and play, or learning and having fun. And I think that's the insight for me about employer or workforce-based partnerships, that you sort of blur those boundaries, that first I learn and then I earn. It's actually all together. I'm doing it all together, so I'm prepared for life. And so that's what gives me courage that this is going to work, and that employers will like it, students will like it. And certainly there's no end to how it gets shaped. It doesn't have to be on large campuses, right? It can be at small neighborhood, small business areas. It can be in a lot of different places, as long as students have a chance to apply what they learn and learn from who's already there.
One of the benefits and curses of going last is you find yourself like, wow, that was a great point. I have to say something smart after that. So for me, we're talking about partnerships, and as a psychologist, I often think about everything we do is relational and based in interpersonal interaction. So when we're talking about why we're going to succeed, it's because we're grounding this in an interpersonal connection with mentorship. And the co-location is so beautiful because it allows for accessibility. We're removing the systemic barrier of kids being able to have access in a way that they wouldn't and have historically not. So being on a corporate America campus at headquarters allows for firsthand experiential learning to actually take place. And I know for me, growing up as a young black boy in America and as a first-generation college student, even as a psychologist now, I didn't know what the heck psychology meant, let alone for students who want to be able to go into STEM fields. So I think, again, this is going to succeed based off of the relationships, the mentorship, the accessibility, and the social justice spirit of removing these systemic barriers.
Thanks for adding that. Milo, I'm going to stick with you for a minute and just ask, Courtney made a case about, one that's familiar about why employers would want to do this, right? And about talent pipelines and needing to reach down. And just in your experience, and even as someone coming from a non-traditional background into the corporate environment, what are you finding when you talk to your colleagues at Belkin? What is a selling point for them, if you will? Sorry to be crass, but why are they doing this? And have you heard arguments that kind of just don't carry as much water, that as educators, we feel like, oh, they should believe in that, but the business people are like, well, not so much.
So in corporate America, and I'm sure we all know ROI, right? Return on investment. As a psychologist, when I first heard that, to me, that's about confidentiality and a release of information. So I'm like, oh, they're not talking about confidentiality. We're talking about what's in it for me, right? So when I have those conversations with colleagues, I often guide them back to, hey, our values as a company are to say that we value and we prioritize diversity and inclusion. And so if this is a value, it aligns with that. So we should make sure our actions are aligned with what we say we're doing. So when I came in, I'm just 7 months into this. When I came in, I created our DEIB commitments. And those are really grounded in walking the talk. So when we're walking the talk, that looks like making sure that our actions are aligned with our behavior. So what's in it for us is that we're going to increase diversity, which is going to increase productivity, which ultimately business folks want to know about the bottom line, right? And so when we can have diverse thought based off of representation being diverse, that increases our innovation. And ultimately, again, for me, the bottom line is making sure that people are healthy. And so that's infused in everything that we do. And just this morning, actually, right before I came here, I did a mindfulness session for the whole company. And that's very similar to what we'll be offering the students as well.
Great. Thanks for letting me pick on you first. But how about others? Does anyone have a perspective about arguments that have worked well or not so well?
I'll be a little bit more of a crass capitalist and say the ROI element is super important for employers. The ones I speak to, generally they start off hesitant, like, well, this is kind of unusual. We're not so sure we want kids on our campus. So we pitch with two angles. The first is an employee benefit. So some of your employees want their kids close by. And this is a great way to reduce commute times, to have kids in an innovative option, happens to be on campus. Parents can be with their kids during the day. And typically employers see employee childcare benefits as daycare, preschool, never really past that. So we're trying to push them to say even parents of older kids want this type of benefit. So that's the first angle. The second angle that is starting to resonate is employers have a lot of open space these days because people are starting to work remotely, or they want to work remotely. So they need ways to use that space. And interestingly, which I'm seeing, they see this as a strategy to get people back into the office. Because they're saying, now my kid can go to school at my corporate campus or in this location, and that means I'm also going to be coming in. And so employer HR departments who are struggling with convincing people to come back are seeing this as a strategy. Super early days, but that was actually an exciting thing to learn.
That is so interesting. Okay. Well, thanks for putting it in the pandemic context too. So that we'll put that one up as a point to take away. How about maybe, sorry to ask the old, what keeps you up at night, but what are the tough choices that you're making? What worries you about doing this kind of education? If you really were to sort of sit with yourself, I know most of it feels right, but when do you kind of maybe have some doubt?
I mean, I think for us, a lot of this depends on us getting the buy-in from the corporate sector. So we can talk in employer language and sort of ROI and say, okay, here's what's in it for you. And we can get to know our partners intimately in the sort of courtship process in terms of what actually matters, because it's different things that matter for different employers. But you have to have, if we're going to scale, we have to have scale across the country of employers who say, this is a way to build the talent pipeline. This is a way for me to meet my D&I goals or my community partnership goals. This is a way for me to give back. So we have to be able to find critical mass in employers around the country who say, yep, this is a strategy and we're all in. So I think that keeps us up. And then I think for any of us who are in startup mode, like any startup, right? Like everything keeps you up at night. But you're trying to launch pod one or site one and do that right, while funders and others are saying, how fast can you go? How can you get this in 100,000 kids? Okay, well, great. Let me open site 1 on Monday, and I'll let you know how that goes. So it's that tension of you're only going to be relevant if you're at massive scale. Great, I want to build something, and we're going to have in our DNA at startup that this should grow to massive scale, and yet I still have to get the first couple ones right, or it won't ever scale. So that's so stressful.
Thank you for going there, your honesty. Anyone else?
I think I'll go next. What keeps me up at night is the massive bureaucracy that I work for. I happen to work for the largest school district in the entire country that serves 1.1 million students and have been doing the same thing for hundreds of years now. And we look significantly different than anything that's ever been done before in public education. So understanding how to navigate that bureaucracy is something that keeps me up at night. Finding the right levers on the policies to push and what needs to be done at a state education department level to support the expansion of this model. And also ensuring that our students are safe. Their safety and well-being is immensely important to me every day. I mean, they're commuting in on an employee shuttle bus with total strangers every single day. They're not on traditional school buses where they're among their peers. They're riding elevators with employees from all walks of life and ensuring that they're doing the right thing and that they're safe and they're not stereotyped or looked down upon is also something that concerns me. And so part of it is ensuring that our students kind of understand the magnitude of the opportunity that they have and what that means for themselves, their families, and the legacy of our school. And so there's been a lot of work that we do right now around professional skills building. And I'm extremely excited to talk to some of the ed tech companies here that are doing some badging work and thinking about how do we scale that to the public sector and how do we make some of the work that's happening in education publicly and transparently accessible to for-profit businesses. So that's what keeps me up at night.
No pressure. No, thank you for going there. Yeah, thank you for going there. Those are big responsibilities to shoulder, so I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so now let me see if I can get a little more provocative in the questioning, although Kayon, I think you have an answer for me because you cited a statistic earlier which was a little mind-blowing, but I've heard this before and I think it's a legitimate question. It's about tracking, right? And it's sort of like, well, you're preparing young people aren't you narrowing their learning, and preparing them for careers? They don't know what they want yet. They're going to change their minds. All those, so shouldn't they go and do more of a BA, liberal arts, instead of what you're offering them? Okay, so I'm just kind of putting out the archetypal critique here. How do you answer that?
I guess I'll start. That's something that that's a question we've been faced with since day one. And for me, it's my happiest day when a young person walks out of one of our pathways after 2 years and say, I never, ever want to do this ever again. And that's good because I want them to have that realization early on while a lot is not at stake and they haven't acquired insurmountable amounts of student loan debt that's going to weigh on them and damage them for the rest of their life. And so that's okay. And I want them to have that realization. But I think the other piece is the exposure that we provide to our young people through having these schools inside of these places of work. Because I know a lot of times young people don't know what opportunities exist outside of their neighborhoods, outside of their school, the four walls of their school communities, their households. So I think this exposure is instrumental to opening up so many more opportunities to young people. So it's quite the opposite. We're not narrowing, we're not tracking. I think we're doing a better job at informing our young people.
Yeah, I think that's true. I actually think we're untracking by actually adding sort of, what are they going to do when they get out of school? Most of them are going to get jobs. So if the end game is, I'm going to have a career, and hopefully it's a family-sustaining wage career that has lots of upward mobility, where I can go and make a life for myself and then do the things I want to do, why aren't we exposing them earlier? I'm not saying I'm going to expose you to one thing. At our first partner, it's a global tech company, but they're also going to be exposing people to pathways in finance, in marketing and communications, in talent. So, and amongst, computer engineering and product design and all sorts of things, very tech specific, but you're broadening things. And to your point, if they decide they hate computer science, better they figure that out when they're 17 than go spend a ton of money getting a bachelor's in computer science and then saying, oh, I don't really want to do that. I actually wanted to go into finance. So I think there's this sense of if we can expose them to real world learning, we're not tracking, we're being more holistic in the full educational experience. And the end game, quite honestly, is careers.
And maybe I'll make an even huge macro point. They say that the first person who's going to live to 150 years old has already been born. And if you do the math, that person's probably going to have a 100-year career. Well, yeah. That person's not going to have the option to have a narrow career. They're going to probably have 20 different jobs across their lifetime, across 7, 8 different careers. So I reject the premise. I don't think you have the option anymore to narrow. We're giving them options early on to say what you like, what you don't like. We're getting them on that path and teaching them how to learn because they're going to have 20 different jobs. They better start now.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What really resonates with me on that is, I don't even think a macro level, for me, more so grounding everything we're doing and what your values are, right? So if you're talking about different career opportunities and not just focused on a particular outcome, or if you go the traditional college route 4 years, you have to be so specifically focused on a major. And if that doesn't work out, then you feel completely lost. And so encouraging and empowering the students to say, my values are X, Y, and Z, and that's going to guide and create different pathways. So I have multiple pathways to get to the same goal. And if we create that, again, mindset approach of my values are A, B, and C, and not just focus on I need to get a letter or I need to have a particular outcome, that allows for more authentic learning to take place. And again, the psychologist is going to say the mental health is going to be that much more important and healthy.
Yeah, and I think one more thing, there was another session earlier today that was about purpose-driven learning in the sense of like to drive equity, we actually have to not just focus on like upper middle class kids like developing their passion, but like low-income Black and brown kids also need access earlier to what is your passion, what is it that you truly love, and how do you bring that into the world? And I actually think connecting it to the real world is a really powerful experience, and the earlier we can start to do that with young people, again, I think it adds to building equity. I think it's just a really important thing.
Okay, thanks for going there. I'm going to ask another one, a rude one. First, I have to say, I hope I'm not the person that's 150. I'm not putting enough away in retirement for that. But anyway, here's another critique that you may hear, maybe even from me, right? But I've also been asked the question like, oh, these are great. These are great little schools. They're terrific. They must cost a whole bunch of money per kid. Like, is that, this is kind of boutique-y, right? So what does this mean for, the millions of other high schoolers in the country who don't get this kind of thing? How do you square that? How do you think about that issue and answer that question?
She's looking at me. I think she wants me to go first. That's a tough one. I don't think what you're doing is boutique at all. I don't think it's expensive. New York City Department of Education is doing it. Reject the question again, right? Certainly there are ways to do it boutique. I think my model is going to be expensive in the beginning, and I'm going to find ways to make it cheaper. But I think you have already proven that you can do it at scale in a pretty affordable way.
We're actually operating at half the cost of the Fair Student funding formula in New York City, so it's not expensive at all. And the more and more that we try to think differently about how we bring employer partners, manufacturers, companies into the fold to sponsor some of the things that we do and to offset the cost of consumable supplies and materials, or to be able to leverage their spaces to do some of this work, it's only going to continue to get cheaper. Coincidentally, right now, we were just talking this morning. I was on a call with some partners from the New York City Department of Education, the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation, about what this might look like inside of a hospital. Immediately we start to think, hey, hospital, we'll do medical careers. No, but there's over 25 different careers, probably more, that exist within any hospital setting. And so we ought to be thinking really outside of the box as to where this can live. So when we talk about boutique and this being boutique-y, not at all. This can be applicable to so many different environments.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is about, like, you look at your reports. If you don't know, JFF is releasing, or have you released it yet?
Yes.
Okay. So they're releasing this report called The Big Blur, right? And they're talking about really what you need is a fundamental change where we could sort of take 11, 14, and sort of last 2 years of high school and first 2 years of college and sort of blend that together. And it could be this really deep academic learning and career-focused learning. And wouldn't that be a better paradigm for the sort of future of the nation? And so I think it's to get there, we all have to start with something, right? Everybody starts with one thing or one site. I think to your point, right, trying to figure out how do I do it cheaper, if I can, still deliver quality. So like we're doing the same thing in LA. We're launching our sites at, about 2/3 of the cost of what it costs to educate a student in LAUSD. So if I have that, that means that I can go to other markets and say I can do this at the same rate or less expensive than the neighboring district. Well, then I have something that starts to raise eyebrows like, oh, okay, it's not that expensive. So now how do I find the corporate partners, find the space, figure out how to do it? So yeah, I think that, again, to your point, like it's not going to be boutique-y when we move to the Big Blur. And everybody starts to say, okay, what are we doing differently in this nation about the end of high school and the beginning of college and really preparing people for the workforce? But we think we have to start with these proof points. And then figure out how we all come together so that every district in America or every city in America, because I don't want to even think about it as districts necessarily, have these options for young people where they can opt in.
Thanks for the shout out, Courtney, and that makes a lot of sense. Compelling case.
He did not ask me to shout out his report, just so you know.
Let's kind of take another turn here, and just what are you betting on? In your design in terms of advancing greater equity and economic advancement opportunities. What's the big bet here? Milo, I don't know. Do you want to start?
Absolutely. I think, actually, I want to go back to how I answered a couple questions ago, betting on people and betting on connections. And I think one of our core elements with Portal is going to be our mentorship, where our employees meet regularly. And then two, another aspect is our lunch and learns, where the employees are going to be able to teach their respective area, whether that's, I think I saw somebody sign up this morning from compensation, so finance related stuff that I don't even know nothing about myself, as well as the big, sexy computer science and chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, et cetera. So I think, to me, partnerships, again, is about relationships. So I'm betting on the connection, and I'm also betting on the accessibility, like I mentioned earlier, to make sure that students have access where they can make money after graduating. Because I think a lot of times that lack of access only perpetuates poverty. And so when we can create access that expands the opportunity to earn, for a lot of folks, a lot of students are going to be first-generation college students. And so having that opportunity is going to be scary, but as an 18-year-old, being almost looked to be the breadwinner, right? So, but they know that's not going to be the case, and the whole family doesn't rest on their shoulders as an 18-year-old. So I think, again, the mentorship and the relational building, and ultimately the empowering support on a regular basis. So,
I think for me, there's a major assumption in education that it must take place in these large institutions that are called schools. And there's no reason it has to be that way. These are expensive, they're antiquated, there's no reason kids have to go there. And typically in urban environments where education quality is on average not as good, there are solutions staring us in the face, and those are employers. They have institutions and locations where kids could learn. So if you could break that assumption that schools are where kids learn, and if they could learn anywhere in their community, assuming it's a safe environment that's been well designed for them, then all of a sudden you open up the window for so many more kids that didn't have opportunity. You don't have to rebuild schools in the old way. You build them in a new way, and you co-locate them with people who actually want to help with that. So that's, I think, the big bet for me.
Anyone else on this?
I mean, I think a big bet for us in terms of increasing equity, so like in addition to the workplace learning, right, we're blurring high school and college, so we're actually expecting a lot of our young people that they're going to be able to master college level content while in high school. So it's, again, like an early college high school on steroids if they can leave with a bachelor's in 4 or 5 years, right? So I think there's this whole sense of like we're expecting more, and I think that we're trying to, I think we've sort of dumbed down education in this country where we don't think that a 15-year-old can do certain things or a 17-year-old can do certain things. And so we're trying to flip it back to saying, like, nope, we think you're completely capable. We think in some cases a 14 or 15-year-old who's motivated, regardless of whether they're fully prepared, actually can master the content that they needed to do this. And so we're betting that, again, first-generation communities of color, are just as capable of accessing content, of accessing experiences, of building social capital. So we're putting all those things together. And again, I think if that works, it's the bet, I think you can really rapidly scale because people will say like, oh, we were actually lowballing what young people can achieve. We were treating them like children instead of treating them like young adults. The kids I'm talking to this summer who want to come to our school, were 14 years old, can be very clearly articulating, I want to be an entrepreneur and this is why I'm interested in this. Or they teach baby math at my school and I'm really excited they can come and you're going to basically say, if I'm ready for Algebra 2 in 9th grade, I'm going for it. And great. So like they know more about what they want and we're not enabling that in the traditional system. And I think there are more and more kids in sort of underserved schools who are ready for more, and we need to rise to meet them.
All right, we have time for one more question, although that should be like everyone else can have a mic drop moment. Like Courtney, like that might have been yours. You can have even another shot. But how about this, which is how big can this get, this kind of education, and what may be limitations about it? And I mean, do you think every student should? I think I have a feeling I know what you would. But should every student have access to some? And is that possible?
Yeah, I think this could completely revolutionize the way we do education. To Amar's point, teaching and learning doesn't need to happen inside of a school building. It can happen anywhere. And I think every single young person needs to have access to these opportunities. Whether they choose it, it's between them and their families. But it's working, and it's working well. I mean, our school took a socioeconomic approach to this. New York City was labeled the most segregated school district in the entire country. And so we have purposely brought together students from different socioeconomic backgrounds together for the purpose of career and technical education, or what we are rebranding to call STEAM education. And we've seen tremendous increases across the board for all young people and for the school communities that they come from. We had, 3 of our schools that were on the state closure list because they were struggling with enrollment, they were struggling with graduation rates, with behavioral issues, and through the partnership, and not just the partnership with us, we don't want to claim, the success they've had, those schools have fell off those school closure lists. In some cases, we have seen up to 300% gains in students' interest in applying to those respective schools, namely for the Brooklyn STEAM Center program itself. And, this is, again, a way to completely revolutionize education, in my opinion.
And I don't think it's that every child needs to do what I'm building. I think it's in every city, small town, urban area, that every kid in America needs to have the options. Like, we really need to think about choice and options. And so if I am in a small town in Nebraska, or I'm in Philly, or I'm in LA, like, how can I easily access, live or remotely, something like what you're doing in Brooklyn, what I'm doing with an employer in LA, or hopefully in lots of cities, what you're doing in a pod. And again, the kid who still wants to go play in the band and be on the football team and go to the big 2,000 kid high school, great. And the kid who wants to go to the classic liberal arts academy, but why don't we have the choices? And most of us, even if we live in a huge city like New York, kids don't have very many options. And so I think this is all about how do we build the options. And post-COVID, or pause-COVID, parents and families really saw there's more than one way to do this. I might not have liked the way it was offered to my child, but they certainly saw there was more than one way. So if anything, I'm hoping this just says, how do we just blow the roof off of choice on options for kids so they can pick what they want to do?
Everything they said.
I can't use that one anymore. So when I think of D&I work, and I think of good D&I work, at the core is social justice. And when I think of social justice, I think of what Courtney was mentioning around having the freedom to choose. So historically, choice has been afforded to those who can afford it. And if we're about, and working in reverse order, if we're about social justice, if corporate America is about D&I, then we have to create these relationships, not partnerships, because it's not about the money, but these relationships that allow for the future to have the freedom of choice.
All right, thanks for closing us out, Milo. Can everyone join me in giving a round of applause to our great panelists? Thank you.